Some neighborhoods hide secrets, some neighbors abuse power, but every lie eventually faces justice. Welcome to HOA Reality 365.
See you in court.
You will. She never imagined she'd see me behind the bench.
My name is Daniel Brooks, and I had spent years building my dream home beside the quiet waters of Silver Pine Lake. It was never about showing off or proving anything to anyone. It was the place where my wife and I planned to grow old together. Every tree, every stone, and every wooden beam carried a memory that no amount of money could replace. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I believed it would be peaceful. The lake was calm. The pine trees stretched high into the sky. The neighbors smiled and waved as I unpacked the moving truck. Everything looked perfect until I met the president of the Homeowners Association. Her name was Victoria Hayes. She arrived before I had even finished unloading the boxes. Wearing an expensive burgundy business suit and carrying a thick binder full of HOA rules, she introduced herself with a smile that felt more like a warning than a welcome. She pointed toward my truck and told me I had already violated several community regulations. According to her, I needed permission for the color of my mailbox. I needed approval for the design of my porch lights. Even the flower pots on my front steps were apparently against HOA's standards. I listened politely and thanked her for the information. I told her I would review the documents once I had settled into the house. She did not like that answer. Over the following weeks, the letters started arriving almost every day. One complaint claimed my outdoor lights were too bright. Another claimed my pickup truck was parked too close to the curb. Then came another notice saying the color of my wooden fence created visual inconsistency within the neighborhood. None of it made sense. Instead of arguing, I quietly gathered every notice and placed them inside a folder. One afternoon, Victoria appeared at my front door again. This time she was not smiling. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "This neighborhood belongs to the HOA, and people who refuse to cooperate never stay here for long." I simply nodded and wished her a pleasant afternoon. She walked away believing she had won. What she never knew was that I had spent my entire career studying the law. I understood property rights better than anyone she had ever threatened. A few days later, I left town for a judicial conference that lasted several days. Before leaving, I checked every lock, turned off every appliance, and activated the security cameras around my property. Everything was exactly as it should have been. 3 days later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end spoke only a few words. "Your house is on fire." For a moment, the world became completely silent. I drove back through the night praying the report was wrong. But as I entered the neighborhood, I saw thick black smoke rising above the pine trees long before I reached my driveway. The house that had taken years to build was now covered in flames. Firefighters were battling the blaze while police officers secured the area. The smell of burning timber filled the air. Pieces of my roof collapsed into the fire as glowing embers floated across the dark sky. Then I saw Victoria. She stood across the street with her arms folded, watching everything happen. She never said a single word. She simply looked at me with an expression that sent a chill down my spine. At that exact moment, I realized this was no ordinary accident. Someone wanted my home gone. And I was going to find out why.
The footage survived.
The morning after the fire, I stood behind the yellow caution tape watching investigators search through the ruins of everything I had built. The smell of burned timber still filled the air, and smoke continued rising from the blackened remains of my home. Firefighters had finally left, but the investigation had only just begun. A senior fire investigator introduced himself and explained that the fire did not appear to be caused by lightning, electrical failure, or natural causes. He asked if I had received any threats before the incident. I paused for a moment before opening the leather folder I always carried. Inside were dozens of HOA violation notices. Every warning letter. Every fine. Every complaint. Every message signed by Victoria Hayes. The investigator slowly flipped through the pages. His expression changed with every document. He asked one simple question. Did anyone ever threaten you directly? I remembered the conversation outside my front porch only days before the fire. Victoria had looked straight at me and said people who refuse to cooperate never stay here for long. At the time it sounded like intimidation. Now it sounded very different. The investigator quietly wrote the statement into his notebook and requested copies of every document. Before leaving the property, I walked toward the security system mounted beside the garage. The metal housing had melted, but something caught my attention. The digital recording unit had been installed inside a fireproof security box buried beneath the concrete foundation. The technicians carefully opened the damaged container. To everyone's surprise, the storage drive was still intact. There was a chance the cameras had survived. The evidence was immediately transferred to the digital forensic laboratory. I knew we would have to wait. Later that afternoon, I visited the county courthouse to obtain copies of property records and neighborhood permits. While reviewing public documents, another discovery caught my attention. Several complaints had recently been filed against the HOA for harassment, intimidation, and selective enforcement. My case was not the first. It was simply the biggest. The more records I collected, the clearer the pattern became. People who challenged Victoria Hayes somehow found themselves facing inspections, legal threats, or expensive property damage soon afterward. As the sun began to set, I returned to the remains of my home one final time. Everything was silent. Only ashes remained where memories once lived. I bent down and picked up a small metal object lying near the driveway. It was badly burned but still recognizable. A disposable fuel canister. It did not belong anywhere near my property. I carefully placed it into an evidence bag without touching the surface. Just then my phone rang. The digital forensic technician spoke calmly. "Mr. Brooks, we recovered something from your security cameras. The footage survived. And you need to see it immediately." At that moment I knew the truth had survived the fire. And someone was about to regret lighting the match.
The fire had destroyed my home.
But it also...
The next morning I drove straight to the digital forensic laboratory. The technician met me at the entrance with a sealed evidence case in his hands. His face told me everything before he even spoke. The security system had done exactly what it was designed to do. Even though the house had burned to the ground, the recordings inside the fireproof storage unit had survived. We entered a secure viewing room where a large monitor displayed the recovered video files. The technician pressed play. At first the footage showed nothing unusual. The front yard was quiet. The lake reflected the evening sky. The security lights switched on automatically as darkness settled across the neighborhood. Then at exactly 11:43 a black SUV slowly entered the driveway. Its headlights remained off. The vehicle stopped just outside the camera angle. A person stepped out wearing a dark hooded jacket and gloves. Their face could not be seen. They carefully walked toward the side of my house carrying a red fuel container. Every movement looked planned. Every step looked rehearsed. Minutes later another camera captured the same person walking behind the garage. They disappeared for nearly 2 minutes. Then everything changed. A sudden flash appeared near the wooden deck. Within seconds bright orange flames exploded across the side of the cabin. The fire spread with terrifying speed. The hooded figure calmly walked back toward the SUV and drove away without looking back. Nobody ran. Nobody panicked. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The technician froze the final frame. The rear of the SUV filled the screen. Most of the license plate had been hidden by smoke. But 3 numbers and 2 letters remained perfectly visible. It was enough. The investigator immediately contacted local detectives who began tracing every vehicle matching the partial registration. While they worked, I noticed something almost everyone else had missed. The SUV had a small silver decal on the rear window. It was the official parking permit issued only to residents of Silver Pine Lake HOA. The driver was not just anyone. They belonged inside the neighborhood. That afternoon, detectives visited every home equipped with private security cameras. Doorbell cameras. Garage cameras. Street surveillance. One by one they collected every available recording. Late that evening my phone rang again. The lead detective spoke only one sentence. "We found another camera. This one shows the driver's face." For the first time since my home burned, I finally believed justice was no longer a question of if. It was only a matter of when. The following morning the lead detective called before sunrise. His voice sounded calm but confident. They had identified the owner of the black SUV. The registration belonged to someone living inside Silver Pine Lake. But it was not registered to Victoria Hayes. Instead, it belonged to her younger brother Michael Hayes, a local construction contractor who frequently performed maintenance work for the HOA. Within hours, detectives obtained a search warrant. Several patrol vehicles quietly surrounded Michael's home while investigators entered the property. Inside the attached garage, they discovered something unexpected: a nearly empty red fuel container. Its shape, color, and manufacturer matched the exact container seen in the recovered security footage. Nearby, investigators found a pair of heavy work gloves. Laboratory technicians immediately collected both items for fingerprint and DNA analysis. Michael insisted he had done nothing wrong. He claimed someone else must have borrowed his SUV. But his story quickly began falling apart. The digital forensic team extracted location data from the SUV's onboard navigation system. The records showed the vehicle had traveled directly to my property on the exact night of the fire. Even more damaging was the mobile phone location history. His phone remained active beside my home for nearly 20 minutes before driving back toward the HOA entrance. There was no reasonable explanation. Later that afternoon, forensic scientists completed their first laboratory report. Traces of the same commercial fire accelerant found inside the burned cabin were also found on the fuel container recovered from Michael's garage. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. News of the investigation spread rapidly through Silver Pine Lake. Neighbors gathered outside their homes whispering about the shocking discovery. Many homeowners who had once supported Victoria Hayes suddenly began asking difficult questions. Why had Michael been near Daniel's house that night? Why had the HOA president never mentioned her brother owned the SUV? Why had so many homeowners received threats after disagreeing with the board? That evening, detectives returned with another search warrant. This time they entered the HOA office itself. Computers were carefully removed. Financial records were boxed as evidence. Meeting minutes, hard drives, emails, and surveillance files were all seized for further investigation. Victoria Hayes arrived moments later. She demanded answers. She accused the detectives of abusing their authority. But no one stopped working. As officers carried another box of evidence toward the patrol vehicles, Victoria noticed one investigator holding a printed photograph. It was the recovered security image showing the black SUV entering my driveway. For the first time since this nightmare began, the confidence disappeared from her face. She realized the investigation was no longer about a burned house. It was becoming a criminal conspiracy. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, detectives placed Michael Hayes into the back of a police cruiser. The entire neighborhood watched in complete silence. Victoria stood alone outside the HOA office, knowing the next knock on the door might be for her. 3 weeks after my house burned, the criminal case officially reached the county courthouse. News reporters filled the front steps before sunrise. Television cameras lined the entrance. Every major newspaper wanted to know how a simple HOA dispute had turned into one of the biggest criminal investigations the county had ever seen. Victoria Hayes arrived wearing the same confident expression she had carried since the beginning. She walked past the reporters without answering a single question. Her attorneys followed closely behind, carrying boxes of legal documents. Inside the courthouse, security officers directed everyone toward courtroom 3. Homeowners from Silver Pine Lake quietly filled every available seat. Some had supported Victoria for years. Others had already begun speaking to investigators. No one knew what was about to happen. At that same moment, I entered through a private judicial corridor. Very few people knew that before purchasing my lake house I had already served as a state judge. The investigation had immediately created a legal conflict because I was also the victim. For that reason, another senior judge had been assigned to hear the criminal case. I had absolutely no role in deciding the outcome. But I still needed to appear inside the courthouse for official administrative matters before the hearing began. As I walked through the hallway wearing my black judicial robe, several court employees greeted me with respect. Court clerks wished me a good morning. Deputies stepped aside. Even the bailiffs nodded as I passed. Victoria had not seen any of this. She was already waiting inside the courtroom. Then the courtroom doors slowly opened. I entered wearing the robe she had never imagined I owned. The room became completely silent. Victoria looked toward the entrance. The color disappeared from her face. For several long seconds she simply stared at me without speaking. Her attorney turned around. His expression changed instantly. He quietly leaned toward Victoria and whispered something she could barely process. The homeowner she had threatened. The man whose house had burned. The person she believed she could intimidate. Was one of the judges serving inside the very courthouse where she now faced criminal charges. She slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked genuinely afraid. Not because of my position, but because she finally understood the seriousness of what had happened. The bailiff announced that the assigned trial judge was entering the courtroom. Everyone stood. I respectfully nodded to the court staff. Then quietly stepped into the judicial chambers, leaving the case entirely in the hands of the independent judge assigned to hear it. Justice would not come because I wore a robe. Justice would come because the evidence spoke louder than anyone ever could. The trial lasted for 6 long days. Every piece of evidence was presented one by one. The prosecution began with the recovered security camera footage. The courtroom monitors showed the black SUV entering my driveway. The jurors watched in complete silence. Then came the forensic reports. Experts explained how traces of the same fire accelerant had been found on the fuel container recovered from Michael Hayes' garage. Digital forensic analysts presented GPS records proving the SUV had remained outside my property on the exact night of the fire. Cell phone location records confirmed the same timeline. Then the fire investigators testified. They explained that the blaze had started in multiple locations around the cabin. It was not an accident. It was a carefully planned act of arson. The defense attempted to argue that the evidence was only circumstantial. But each witness strengthened the timeline. Every document supported the previous one. Every piece of evidence connected perfectly. Then the prosecution presented thousands of internal HOA emails recovered from the seized computers. Several messages revealed discussions about forcing homeowners to leave the neighborhood through intimidation. One email stopped the entire courtroom. It had been sent by Victoria Hayes only 2 days before the fire. The message read, "If he refuses to leave, we will make sure this property becomes impossible to keep." The courtroom became completely silent. Victoria slowly lowered her head. For the first time, she realized there was no explanation that could erase what had already been written. The jury left the courtroom to begin deliberations. The wait felt endless. Late that afternoon, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood as the jurors returned to their seats. The courtroom was so quiet that every footstep echoed through the room. The foreperson handed the verdict to the judge. The judge carefully opened the document. He looked toward the defendants. Then he began reading. Michael Hayes was found guilty of felony arson, criminal property destruction, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. Victoria Hayes was found guilty of conspiracy, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and multiple criminal violations connected to the HOA investigation. Several additional civil lawsuits were immediately scheduled against the HOA board. The organization itself was placed under court-appointed administration while financial records were reviewed. Many homeowners quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Some had lived in fear for years. Now they finally believed the truth had won. As everyone slowly left the courtroom, I paused outside the courthouse steps. The evening sun reflected across the city skyline. My house was gone. The memories could never be replaced. But something far more important had survived. Justice. Weeks later, construction crews began rebuilding my home beside Silver Pine Lake. The first wooden beam was placed exactly where the old cabin had once stood. This time the foundation was stronger than ever. As I watched the sunrise over the lake, I realized something. A house can burn. Wood can turn to ashes. But integrity, truth, and justice will always stand long after the flames disappear. If this story reminded you that no one is above the law, then remember to support the channel. Because the next HOA story might be even more unbelievable than this one.
Justice did not erase the pain, nor return the lost home, but it always leaves a trail. Like and subscribe to HOA Reality, comment where you're watching from.
Click the next HOA screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Re 365. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.